All right, everyone. I am so glad we are here for episode number 57, and I apologize for the couple week hiatus. Like so many people across this country, I had the experience of COVID, and even being vaccinated and boosted, I will tell you it was a struggle to say the least. So I am so glad to be back after 2 weeks of jumping off of the podcast. And I could not think of a better guest after 2 weeks than our guest tonight. So I cannot wait for you to hear from one of the amazing people in this field with a remarkable organization that so many people rely on and get support through. So, Julie, welcome to the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast and representing the Attachment and Trauma Network, which is doing amazing work. How are you? And as I ask everybody, what's the Julie story?
Thank you, Matthew, and I am glad you're feeling better, and hope you to continue to get all your energy back. And I'm glad to be here to talk with you and with everybody out there. What is the Julie story? That's a great first question. I don't have much of a background in trauma initially. In fact, I have one ACE. So here I am, the woman who has been working with the Attachment and Trauma Network for about 15 plus years at this point. My story is really a shared story of what I learned when my youngest daughter joined our family. So we're a family of adoption, and we're a blended family too. So we call it parenting always, right? We've parented always.
Right.
So when my husband and I got married and blended our family, we thought we were done. He thought we were done. I had it in the back of my mind that adoption was something I was very interested in. And we ended up in 1998 going to China and bringing our daughter home, who was 19 months old at the time. So we didn't know what we didn't know about significant neglect and malnutrition and all the things that had happened to her or not happened to her in the first 19 months of her life, or how that impacted her. And it wasn't for, I don't say that in terms of the child welfare folks and the adoption folks not prepping us.
Right.
We didn't know. They
know.
didn't know, really. I mean, nobody really knew. But it was evident to us because we had parented other ways that something was really not right. That she physically, developmentally, picked up quickly. She wasn't walking when we got her. She hadn't eaten solid foods. She was 19 months old. So all of those things happen rapidly. Like almost every day there was a new development. But the things that lagged were language and her emotional and sensory pieces that, and I didn't even have that language in 1998.
Right.
I was just like, what is happening to her? Why is she raging for hours? Why is this happening? Why can't she sleep? Why can't all of these things happen? And so it was challenging, to say the least. And it was we weren't getting any kind of good guidance from the typical places that you go because the professionals didn't know either. And sometimes professionals are a little bit wary about saying they don't know. So what they do say is sometimes sends you down some really wrong paths. So I did that for a couple of years until finally I realized that there was a community of parents out there, albeit not easy to find because it was still, in the 1990s and we weren't super interneted at that point. But it was that I actually found the folks that were the founding folks of the Attachment and Trauma Network and other groups like them to start talking to me, and what they, and then it all made sense. I was like, oh my gosh, now I get it. So, I spent the next decade for sure devouring any piece of information I could get about attachment and attachment disorders. And this was before anybody had really started to write. I mean, this was before Bruce Perry and
Right.
before Russell Van de Kolk had published their books, right?
Right.
So there was no neuroscience to speak of. There was nobody telling us that, giving us the hand and brain model and telling us about flipping our lids and talking about amygdalas and all of those things. But we were piecing together whatever we could get our hands on about attachment, and then eventually about trauma, and that it was that you couldn't have attachment disorders unless you had been traumatized. It was like, oh, that's what, that was a revelation. And then the learning of all of the neuroscience was a game changer. It was a game changer in our family, because all of a sudden it occurred to us that what was happening for our daughter was a can't, not a won't. And it was no longer personal. I mean, we could step back and go, but wait, if she can't, calm herself, I didn't have the word regulate in those days, right? If she can't calm herself, if she can't, turn her thinking brain on, if she can't do these things in the moment, then it isn't about she's out to get us, or this is purposeful, or she's seeking our attention, or all of those things that well-meaning but not knowing, even professionals had said to us, right? So it was the school of hard knocks all the way up, right? In terms of learning. And my family can stand here and say with complete clarity that people with significant developmental trauma disorder issues can definitely find a healing, healthy way of being, and can definitely succeed in ways that, quite frankly, astound me on a daily basis, and even astound her, I think, in terms of, but it's not easy, but it can happen, and it doesn't happen for enough people in this world at this point, but it can, and we are light years of where we were. And frankly, when my daughter graduated high school, which seemed like a giant pinnacle for us, and she graduated with honors, and we're incredibly proud of how tenacious she was in all of that. But there was an opportunity for me to go back to work, instead of stopping my career and my life to parent her and focus on her and try to help her in every way that I could. And it wasn't worth it. My career had been marketing for engineers and architects and the built environment. And it was a good career. And I love those people. And bridges and roads and wastewater treatment plants and airports are really important, but they're not as important as this. And so I couldn't turn my back on what I knew at that point. And I was like, okay, so I called the folks at ATN and I said, I got to volunteer with you. I got to do whatever I need to do to be, to help this movement, because there's nothing more important than this at this point.
You might be the liaison between my wife and I that I didn't even know I needed, because she's an engineer, and all of those things that you just said, like, get her excited. But when I talk about trauma, she's like, not my jam. Like, and it's interesting. So maybe you're the person that, like, we three just need to get together so we can all have, those bridge conversations.
I love engineers. I really, really do, Matthew. My husband is a scientist. He's not an engineer. He's got a degree in chemistry. His career was industrial hygiene, which is, if you want to geek out on sciencey things, you can do that. It's workers' exposure to chemicals and noise and all those great things. I love hearing about that, because there's a part of my brain that just digs the science, right? I don't, but that's part of what has been able to sustain me in learning about the neuroscience and all of the things that I had to learn, because that was way out of my field. I graduated college to be an English teacher, and then ended up in writing and marketing professions from there.
It's interesting, because I've my career is in education, but I didn't know it. And I wasn't ready for it. And we didn't have the science. You're right. Like, and at the end of the day, the journey that all of us have experienced, no matter from what angle, has been similar. It all is based in what I would say very current research. And obviously that is continuing. I mean, the research is not stopped.
Right.
But it was a paradigm shift for so many of us to go, wait, whether it was our own children or whether it was the children in our classrooms or our schools going, this makes so much sense. Now it makes sense. And I will say, my wife, although an engineer, we did serve as a foster family for a couple years. And that's when the conversations really began to dig in of, this is what I'm telling, this is what I talk about. Let's talk through this. But powerful. I am curious about your daughters, and from a parent's perspective, not from your daughter's perspective, because we can just ask her, but from your perspective, what was school like for you as a parent with a child that you knew may had some exceptionalities that you couldn't pinpoint?
Her school journey was really rocky, and that's been, I mean, that there's a catharsis at the end of this when we talk about our conference and what we do programmatically at ATN. She struggled. She was in the early intervention program here in Georgia, and then she was in the special needs preschool and the and all of those all the way up, right? And never quite able to be pinpointed as having autism, because of course it's developmental trauma.
Sure.
She may have some autistic tendencies too, because there's no way you can, I mean, you can't parse all of that out, right?
Right.
But so she struggled all the way along. And by the time she got to third grade, and this is going to be painful, but I think our school system had kind of done a cost Benny on her and decided that they should push us a little bit about, that she was not, so we had an IEP meeting, and the placement that they wanted to place her in was an alternative setting where there were restraints and seclusions at that time. And I didn't know a lot yet, right? Because there was still a lot that I didn't know about neuroscience, but I knew enough to know that that was a bad idea. And I had a couple of therapists that she was seeing who thought it was a bad idea. And so I stood up and said no. And we had a protracted due process, all the, whole 9 yards. And the miracle in all of that, at the end of this 2 years of hearings and her being at home and being in a stay put, and, all the special ed education that I got, I have a ton of that.
The real education. Right.
like how to really do that, was that Georgia opened a virtual charter school at about that same time. And so I turned to them, because I was like, okay, the one thing I can do a lot of things with her, but the one thing I can't do is be her elementary teacher in terms of curriculum and all content things, right? So they were great. They actually issued her an IEP. We went to private providers. It was a good fit for her, and I thought it was a temporary fit. I kept thinking, well, you know what? I'll put my business on hold. We'll do this a year or two, and boom, I'll be back. Then the years went by, and we did that for a decade. And it worked for her because over time she learned how to engage people online, which felt a whole lot safer to her than engaging them in real life.
Wow.
And I was so shocked and amazed when they invited her to be part of the National Honor Society because her grades were really good. And I was like, man, I don't know. So I called the advisor and I said, hey, here's the deal. You don't really see the whole picture here. And she said, and because their service project was tutoring younger children. And I'm like, I'm not sure she can do that. And they're like, well, can we let her try? Like, sure. So one day I walk in, she's on the computer with a freshman, and she's a junior, and she's helping them with their algebra. And she's like on the whiteboard, doing all of the things. And she's like, do you understand? And he said, no, I don't understand. She goes, okay, let's try another way. And I'm just sitting there going, who is this person with this executive function and this? And she could, you could hear he was getting frustrated, but she wasn't.
She stayed calm. Wow.
Right. And I was like, okay, something is good. Something's happening here. And that was the beginning of me being able to watch her, step into her own. that when she's in environments where she feels safe and she works hard to make sure that she's in those environments.
Right.
Now she's become a pretty good advocate for herself at age 25 at this point, to keep herself in those kinds of situations. She's amazing, absolutely amazing.
And thanks for sharing that, because this is the Educators Network podcast. So I want educators to hear that, because that's the important piece. And I think it's even more powerful that an educator or someone saw something and said, just let her try it.
Yes.
Because
most certainly.
That is I don't know how many times I've had a conversation just like that with a parent. They're like, I don't know, they're shy. Okay, let's ask them, do they want to? And they do. One makes me think, we have called a leadership day. It's planned and ran by kids, only supported by adults. And our DJ that day, his mom was so nervous. This kid rocked the house. When I tell you, he went off script, and it was the greatest thing that I could have experienced. I don't know if you know, but I don't really like scripts and boxes. So when kids get out of those scripts and boxes, I'm like the one cheering them on. I think my shirt says it all, unapologetic disruptor, literally, right? But I mean, I think those are the powerful pieces. That's when education works, when parents and educators, right, see a commonality, but there's always that, let's try this and see. Because that exploration is what I call identifies the genius of every kid. Because every kid, every single child, no matter what the perception is, has genius. I believe it. Every single kid has genius. It's our role not to figure it out. It's our role to build a environment and a space, both emotional and physical, where kids can figure it out on their own. And so, I mean, that is exactly what I heard you say. And I don't know if you remember when I said I was tired. Your whole conversation just got me really fired up.
Good. Good.
Because that's what this is what it's about. And I would assume those educators probably weren't trauma informed, right? By definition.
By definition. Frankly, I came out of my local county so wounded that I really didn't want to ever have a conversation with an educator again, right? I mean, you spend 13 days in court, you're seeing the ugly underbelly of all of that, right? And I kept thinking, I don't know exactly what my child needs,
right?
But don't either.
That.
It's not this, and it's like, you're not helping me. And then we go to the virtual school, and I guess because a lot of those educators were devoted to thinking outside of the box, because that's what would make them at a virtual school, right? They were willing to let her try all kinds of things and try to give opportunity for, as best they could in that virtual world, for her to try all kinds of things. And it helped me, in terms of my biggest woundedness. Right. It helped me in that regard. And then it was, definitely preparing me for when Melissa Sadin and others at ATN turned to me one day and said, we need to have a schools piece of ATN, and we need to have a conference, and we need to focus on educators. And I was like, okay, because I was coming at it from all of the parent perspective.
I can only imagine.
And I got to tell you, Matthew, that and this is probably needs to be saved for later in the story, but our first conference, I stood in the back of the room and just wept at the sight of all of those hundreds of teachers who I knew, I could feel it, cared about creating just what you talked about, an environment and a space for these kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's hope in the heavens after all, that children, are going to get the things that they need. And what can we do to make it, make more people like this, equip more teachers to be able to do what they need to do. I mean, that's,
and I think too, that until we can actually say, and I've said it myself, that schools traumatize kids. Some schools traumatize some kids. Until we can actually own it as practitioners. I owned my pre-understanding of trauma negative impact on kids because it existed. And I talk about it openly. I've not always been a trauma-informed educator, right? And I was more as a teacher than when I first started being an administrator. For some reason, and when I became an administrator, I felt like there was this expectation of me I was so wrong. And ethically in my heart, I knew it didn't feel right. And I had to navigate and figure out what that was. And that's when the research came. That was it. That was the game changer, right? And I think you're right. And I think too, as educators, I encourage everyone, and I'll be encouraging educators when I'm in Houston in a few weeks, right? We have to measure our intent and our outcome. Do those match? Because if we intend to inspire, motivate, and lead kids to be their best, but what we're doing is making them feel shamed and making them feel uneducated or not smart, or then they're not matching. So it's time we all begin to align, especially using research. So let's get in, because you talked about this conference, you talked about ATN. Tell us about ATN, what the Attachment and Trauma Network is all about, and what it does for the international community.
Sure. It is really at the root, it is all about helping children with significant trauma impact. Whether that trauma impact also has impacted their attachment, which is, people ask us all the time, what's attachment doing on the front of your trauma organization? And it's like, oh, it's the
everything.
Most important thing.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
The everything part, right? It's the solution. Healthy attachment is the solution to early childhood trauma, but it's also something that can get easily damaged and present all kinds of really big challenges. So initially, we were founded by parents for parents to support parents with the support of clinicians who were trying to help those parents, knowing that you cannot help a child heal of significant trauma in a 1 hour a week therapy session. It just doesn't work. That's not how the protocols work. If somebody is telling you that, if you're a parent listening to this and somebody is telling you that, find new professionals to work with, find attachment focused professionals that will help coach you and prepare you for what you need to do from a parenting standpoint. And just like teachers, parents, we got to own our own stuff too. In a really big way.
That is right.
And that was a challenge for me. I had a daughter whose behaviors were off the chain, and was really giving the rest of my children a pretty healthy dose of their own trauma from time to time. And I can remember this therapist suggesting to me that I needed, a pretty big dose of my own therapy, right? And I was so offended. And I look back on myself and I'm like, okay, I didn't get what I didn't get there at all. And I wasn't ready to accept what this was looking like, or what the role of therapy and the role of support really are for those of us who are doing this work. It's hard work, but it's hard work because we have to clarify ourselves and clarify who we are, right? And what we're after, which is to build that attachment with our children, and to not shame them, and to grow them relationally, and all of those things, give them that emotional strength. And we can't do that from a place that we're not emotionally strong and that we haven't dealt with our own stuff. And so
when you said it's not just educators, it's like parents. And listen, Julie, I am a firm believer that there should be staff-based therapeutic supports on a school staff for the adults as much as the kids, because I know a lot of my previous experiences have been triggered in a school. My role as a student and my role as an administrator or a teacher, right? Teachers have triggered me as an adult based off of my experiences that I had at school, right? And so I think that's the hard part when we realize it's really not about the kids necessarily. The outcome is it's really about us. It's about our own internal work. It's about our own understanding of our own trauma and triggers and how we respond, and making sure we can stay in that space of regulation to hold space and to help build those positive attachment relationships with our kids in a school. I mean, I hope one day we can, that's a paradigm shift I hope we can eventually get to, because it's so important. It is, until we do our own work. Yeah, it's hard to support others, whether they're our own children or other people's children.
Yep. 100%. 100%. So yeah, we started there with parents, and in 2009, Nancy Spoolstra, who was the original founder, she lived in Kansas City. She decided she wanted to retire and stay home and play with her grandbabies, and so it was basically still an all volunteer organization. Everybody was like rowing from their own, just pool our money, pool our resources, pool our energies together. And what can we do? So we had, at that point, we were having some parent conferences, and they were beautiful, supportive, wise things. And we were picking up new neuroscience all the time, and they almost bankrupted us every time we did them. It was this ragtag group of folks. Right.
Sure.
And so I said, well, sure, I can give it a shot, because I've got a background in business, and let's see what we can do with this. Not even recognizing in 2009, I don't think, where the field of trauma and trauma informed. And it was about that time that I started hearing about ACEs. I mean, I was just, it wasn't even in the vernacular yet, right? We were out there floating around going, what is this ACE study? Type of thing. And watching all of that. So through the 2000s and the 2010s, the focus was still on parents, and we were working a lot with intensive kind of work with families who were really in crisis, online support, building that as much as we could. The technology was there to start to do webinars and things along those lines. So we were trying to gear that up again with the family focus. And there were about 4 educators who were also adoptive parents that were part of our network, that were using a lot of the ideas and strategies and things that were being taught in our webinars in their schools or classrooms across the country. And they just kept talking to me about that. They just kept saying, hey, this is what's happening. This is working really well with this group of students. And, and then the rest of our members were saying things like, the biggest problem we have is that once we understand how to get ourselves regulated and our kids regulated, then we put them on the school bus and all hell breaks loose. Right. And so what can we tell the teachers? What can we do? And, how do we make that conversation happen? So that was one conversation. And then we had this group of teachers who were also parents who were talking to each other. And we just had the good fortune to be able to all go to a conference together and sit down and have a 3.5-hour lunch where the ideas were just electric about what can we do for teachers? How can we start talking to teachers in a trauma-informed way? And that was about 2015. So
in a little school in Nashville, at that same time, I was sitting with a team going, you guys aren't going to believe what I just learned all about, and we've got to do it differently. I swear it was 2015.
That's great.
This has to change right now. We're committing malpractice. We have to do something different right now. And isn't it amazing when you get a collaborative, forward-thinking group of individuals, and it doesn't have to be, just how much can happen?
Right. Exactly.
Because you got your conference coming. I would assume that was the seed, right?
It was
this opportunity for any listener to be a part of.
It was. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we started by making as many phone calls and outreaches to anybody we found that we thought was doing this work. And it was fascinating, because we started doing audio recordings. They weren't video recordings of interviews with all of these people and linked them together, and they found each other. I mean,
Wow.
and folks like Jim Sporleader and the folks at Compassionate Schools and the folks at the Mass Advocates, and the perennials at the roots of this work.
Right.
And some of them didn't know that the others were working in this field at all. So that was really fascinating to watch everybody just kind of pull together. So then the same group just turned to me and said, okay, it's time for us to do a conference. I was like, okay, well, I don't know anything about running large conferences, but let's give it a shot. So we started in DC in 2018 and had almost 700 educators. The next year we almost doubled that. The next year we came to Atlanta and we were just at about the 18 or 1900 mark. And that happened to be February of 2020. And you know what happened in March of 2020.
I do.
Right. So last year we went virtual, had about the same amount of people virtual. And this year, because life is still crazy, but we're also contracted in Houston, we're gonna do 2 at once because we just feel that bold.
Because why not, Julie?
Why not? I mean it's
why not?
And anything can happen. Right? Whatever.
There's the punishment. Let's just be glutton for it, right? I mean, but I think it's going to be a remarkable, amazing experience, and I'm very fortunate to be able to be a part, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be connecting to people that I've never actually sat across the table for. Now, I am a little nervous, Julie, because you've got a lot of amazing people, and if we all go out to lunch together, please don't think I just call myself amazing. I'm saying I'm going to be joining a bunch of amazing people.
You are amazing, but there are a lot of other amazing people coming.
I'm almost fearful with the world. I don't think they're ready for us because I think we as a collective, right, of a group of people, the work it's advancing. It's becoming so much more important.
It is
than it ever has.
Yeah.
We still have policies that are going in place, and we still have politicians that are trying to ban words like social emotional learning and trauma informed and equity, but that isn't stopping the work. I mean, I think I just can't wait to be there. So talk about some of the opportunities that people can experience at ATM.
Let's do it. No, this conference it's I mean, every year it's been amazing. This is the most amazing yet. We have 4 very powerful keynotes, and then so many folks taking the main stage in Houston that are powers in their own right. That you're right. We're probably going to blow the roof right off that hotel. It'll be great. On Monday, we're going to start with Fanya Davis, Dr. Fanya Davis, who is an icon in the whole restorative justice world. And she is actually going to address the intersection between trauma-informed work and restorative justice work, which I think is so critical. And it's time that the folks that are advocating for both of those movements find ways we can that we can push forward together, because there really is a lot to push forward together. And then on Tuesday, and we just talked to his staff today, we're going to be joined by the Secretary of Education himself, Miguel Cardona, whose speechwriter assured me that he is so excited to address us that he's probably going to redline everything she writes and just write what he wants to say.
Hey, right here. See this? You got to go off script. You got to go right here. We want to hear from him, right? We want to hear it from here.
From his heart. And I think we're going to get that. He, just so the listeners know, he's not physically coming to Houston, but I think he's going to feel the warmth from us all the way to DC. So we'll have him on the big screen. We'll have him live so that we can ask him questions and interface with him. And Matthew's going to be part of the panel that is all part of that, because it's going to be good forward thinking stuff. I mean, it really, it's time we have those conversations. The folks that are attending virtually, it's a hybrid conference, so it's challenging from a conference planning standpoint to record live while it's happening and broadcast, for people to watch virtually. That's really difficult. So we're doing a twofer here. We're doing a whole agenda in Houston, but everybody, including the 2 keynotes I just talked about and all the folks that are presenting on the main stage, will be recorded and shown to our virtual conference as a bonus track. But the virtual's got their own thing going on. They're going to be kicked off by Dr. Stephen Porges, who's the originator of the polyvagal theory. And then the keynote on Friday is Amelia Nagoski, who is one of the 2 sisters who wrote the Burnout book, which is a fascinating book on burnout and how it impacts us all, and has the neuroscience base in it that's got the same underpinning. So I'm excited about both of those, and so many workshops. On the virtual side, obviously people can watch it for 90 days. The other thing that we're trying to do on the virtual side is really get in what we are calling real world examples. They're almost like little mini case studies that are sort of grouped by topic, where people come in, schools and organizations and others who've implemented things, come in and give us a 30-minute, this is what we did, this is how it worked, here are our outcomes, here's where things went well, where they didn't go well. Because people get to the end of our conference and they're generally so filled with ideas, and then they're like, how am I going to implement?
Where do I start? Yeah.
And is anybody else really even doing this work? So finding other people who are doing those things is really important. And we are all about trying to make sure that teachers, educators go home with the idea of, where can I find people that can help me implement? Where can I find people that have been there before? That type of thing.
I would make one suggestion to them. It's called the Trauma Informed Educators Network group on Facebook. There's only 30,000 people who are trying to do the work. And I think, going from my experience, that's exactly why I started the little network on Facebook, because I, as a new practitioner, was trying to connect to people who were also either have done the work a while, or were trying to also start. That was the whole reason I wanted to start a group, so I could figure out how I could learn from other people. And a little tidbit, it's why I started my podcast. So I could talk to brilliant people like you and all of the other guests, so I can learn more. Because I think the power of this work is, it's just starting. The ball is just starting to roll, and we have to learn from each other. You also have another avenue that people can learn from. You also have a podcast, or 18 has a podcast.
We do.
Tell people about the podcast, because I love what you all are doing.
Yeah, it's called Regulated and Relational, and Ginger Healy, who's our parent program director, and I are we're the hosts. A lot of times we're the main voices. We started it that way on purpose. The original plan was, let's talk about the concepts, in a very concept way. What do we mean when we say attachment? What do we mean when we say attachment disorder? What do we mean when we say, trauma or resilience, or any number of terms that sometimes get wonky with people as the movement grows. Sometimes people dilute things or sort of misunderstand things. So the first year has really been, what's the definition of this? What does this look like? How is shame involved? How is all of these different topics that exist out there on our episodes? The next year or two, we're going to be bringing guests in to sort of build on all of that, to build on concepts, and really trying to make it about something that's generic enough that it doesn't matter where you're trying to do your trauma-informed work. It doesn't matter if you're a parent or an educator, if you're a community, if you have community initiatives. We find a lot of our listeners are folks that are doing community work, or are doing work in juvenile justice, or work in medical fields, or other places too, that they're looking for this information that's out there in bite-sized pieces. And that's really been the point of the podcast, is to try to do that. to what you said about, about rolling this ball. I'm thinking giant snowball that's picking up things as it rolls.
You're exactly right.
That it really it has to be a community work, and we, that's been our strategy at ATN for the longest, is that we want to be part of whatever that community is and play whatever our role can be to help. Whether it's the megaphone role of trying to get things out on social media and tell folks and broadcast it, whether it's the education role of helping with the definitions and all of those things, because this is crucial work, and it's crucial that everyone knows. That
facts. And I think it shows what you just said. Shows you're on a podcast talking about another podcast, and I'm excited to hear about your podcast while we're talking about mine. And I think that's the power of the work. And you talked about Jim Sporleader earlier. That is always, I was very fortunate when I saw Paper Tigers, which was part of my paradigm shift. It was one of those catalysts, like so many other people. And because I am relentless, I reached out to him and I said, "Can we talk?" And I spoke to him, and then I got to meet him in Louisville, and we got to hang out every evening, just he and I talking. And that was one message he's always had. One, there's not enough people doing this work. Two, there's not enough people talking about this work. And three, we all have to support each other in this work. This is not a competitive field. It's a field of changing massive paradigms in all sectors, not just education, but like you said, juvenile justice, right? Community organization, all of those spaces. And that's why I'm so thankful that you all at ATN and you personally have that mindset, because it's the only way this work is going to continue is collectively.
It is. Yeah. And we need each other, mostly because, in part because we don't always have the energy to go on, right? There's a little bit of that, right? But at the same time, we're not going to solve trauma. No organization out there is going to do that. And yet those of us at the center of this, with this fire in our belly, this passion that we have for it, our voices collectively need to be heard, because we've lived and breathed it, and we understand it. And we don't want the mass public to gloss over it. We don't want it to be gobbled up as like, oh, well, that was, last year's trend was trauma-informed education. And now we're going to do this. Well, wait a minute. The kids are still, struggling with their trauma.
Yes.
Hold up. Let's back. And so are we as adults. Let's back up and see what we can do here, because it's not about, checking a bunch of boxes and boom, we did that last year.
You're right.
Done. So
I call it the operating system, right? It's like your iOS or your Android. This isn't something that I do. It's who I am. It's like right here. Like, yes, there are practices and strategies. Absolutely. I mean, all of the practices, but it's still, it's right here. And I hope that everybody knows that it is a journey. Nobody is the most trauma informed of anything. We are all just trying to navigate this paradigm shift. And I'm just so excited to be in a few weeks, to be able to meet you in person and to meet everybody else. So Julie, the last question, I told you 45 minutes goes by really fast. The last question is, from your perspective as a parent, as a practitioner, and as the executive director of ATN, what do you want educators to know right now?
Wow. Did you tell me you were going to ask me that? Because
no, but I asked that same question at the end of it.
Okay. What do I want educators to know right now? I want you, first and foremost, to know that you're enough, that you have within you what is needed. It's already there. You are going to have to look at it through a different lens, probably, and you're going to have to do the hard work on yourself. And that might sound opposite of what you would think somebody would say to you, but it really is true. The best thing I ever did for my daughter, the best thing that I've ever seen educators do for their classes and their schools, is to focus on what's not working for yourself and focus on what you need to do to be able to have the strength to pour into the kids day after day, because it is all about relationships. And I know that might sound trite to you, but that's all learning happens in relationships. All parenting, all attachment, all relationships happen in relationship. And if our children don't come out of their childhoods knowing how to form secure relationships, no amount of cognitive learning really matters. I mean, knowing how to do algebra, knowing how to go to college, knowing how to drive a car is nothing compared to being healthy in a relational way.
So powerful. And I want to add too, in the schools, we have to focus on collective supports. We have to have each other's back.
You better.
I mean, at the end of the day, it starts with us as individuals, and then we have to look at collective support, because right now, I will tell you, I've been in this for 15 years. It's the hardest experience I've ever had as an educator. For 1,000 different reasons, most of them not the children. But it is absolutely a challenge. And I think you're right. We just have to keep it right here. We got to keep looking right here, because it is challenging, and it's never going to be easy, but it's certainly challenging. So Julie, if people want to, if they want to get in touch with you, or they want to follow your social media, where can they find you?
It's easier to find the Attachment and Trauma Network than it is to find me.
Yeah.
You can do that on Facebook, on LinkedIn. It's Attached Trauma on Facebook. I'm going to tell you that I don't even know what it is on LinkedIn, but there's about 50,000 people over there. So
if you just add attachment, and it pops right up.
Yep. Perfect. If you want to email me directly, you can do that at julieb@attachedtrauma.org. Our conference is conference.attachedtrauma.org. So you can find that. We know that that there are a lot of you that your minds are way not on coming to this conference, but think about it. Think about the possibility of at least joining us virtually, even if you view a lot of it in the next 90 days. I think that what we've got is life changing for folks that are new to this work, and it's affirming for those of us who are in the trenches trying to do it. And I know it's been an incredibly tough year to that the last thing you need is something more to do or something more to think about. But we're with you, and if not this year, then next year, when things are going to be a little bit easier, right?
And here's the thing. There's nothing better to recover from whatever experience you have as an educator than to get around a bunch of people who have a lot of passion and a lot of fire to rejuvenate what you need to be successful during educational roles right now. So I can tell you, it's why I'm going. I'm going to be there because I'm ready to get around people that are going to get me so fired up that I know that I can put that foot in front of the other. So thank you all who listened live. And for those of you who continue to follow the podcast, thank you so much. I am so amazed. We are about to hit 100,000 streams on this podcast, which is mind-boggling to me. So thank you all very much. Julie, thank you so very much. And as always, please, please, please wash your hands, and if need be, wear a mask, which, mind you, we will be wearing them at the ATN
We will.
conference.
You will need to show us your Vax cards and bring your masks and come and have a safe time with us in Houston for sure. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
No problem. Thank you all very much. To those live, give me just 1 second. All right, Julie, thank you. We're still live for just a second. I just wanted to pause the actual podcast. For those of you who are on here, thank you so much for interacting with us. Thank you for listening to us. And if you do come to the conference, tap us on the shoulder, say, hey, because we want to see you. And as you can see at the bottom of the ticker, what I refer to as the Scrappy Little Trauma-Informed Educators Conference in Nashville. It's a tiny little
not so little, but scrappy.
It's scrappy. Oh, it's a scrappy one. We are scrappy.
We love Scrappy.
Yeah, and please check that out too, because we again, you can come in Houston and then just come to Nashville and we'll just all hang out again. Because there's never enough doses of motivation and inspiration from each other. And so we hope you consider that. If you want to follow me, I'm right there, Principalist, on Instagram and Twitter, and you can see the others. But thank you all for listening, and I appreciate it. And I will see you next week.